Imagine a world where Hollywood doesn't dominate every movie screen. Where learning Mandarin or Portuguese opens more doors than French or Spanish. Where Brazilian samba festivals share the stage with Russian ballet and Indian classical dance in cities across the globe. Where the story of civilization isn't told exclusively through a Western lens. Sound impossible? Well, it's already happening, and most people have no idea. While everyone's been focused on BRICS as an economic alliance trying to challenge the dollar, something far more subtle and potentially more powerful has been unfolding. A cultural revolution. BRICS represents nearly half the world's population. That's 4 billion people, 4 billion perspectives, thousands of languages, countless traditions, all starting to amplify their voices on the global stage. And they're not doing it through military might or economic threats. They're doing it through movies, music, language programs, student exchanges, art exhibitions, and cultural festivals. They're weaponizing culture. Welcome to the world of soft power. It's how nations influence others without firing a shot or imposing sanctions. And BRICS Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and now expanding to include Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, UAE, Saudi Arabia, and Indonesia has figured out that in a multipolar world, the nation that tells the most compelling story often wins. So today, we're diving deep into something most geopolitical analysts miss. How BRICS is quietly reshaping global culture. One film festival, one exchange program, one language center at a time? Because while Western nations have been wielding soft power for decades, a new player has entered the game. And they're playing it very differently. Let's talk about the culture war you didn't know was happening. Before we go any further, let's talk about what soft power actually means. Because it's one of those terms that gets thrown around a lot, but rarely explained properly. The concept was coined by Harvard professor Joseph Nye back in the 1990s. Hard power is when you get what you want through force or payment, military action, economic sanctions, bribes. Soft power is when you get what you want through attraction and persuasion. You make others want what you want. Think about it this way. America didn't just dominate the 20th century through military superiority. It dominated through Hollywood movies that made American culture look aspirational. Through rock and roll and blue jeans that symbolized freedom, through universities that trained the world's elite. Through a language English that became the global lingua franca. That's soft power. And it's incredibly effective because people don't feel coerced. They feel inspired. For decades, soft power was essentially a Western monopoly. American pop culture, European fashion, Western educational institutions, these shaped how the world saw itself. If you wanted to be modern, sophisticated, successful, you adopted Western cultural markers. But here's what has changed. BRICS countries collectively account for around 42% of the global population and 25% of global GDP. They're no longer willing to have their stories told by others. They want to tell their own stories. And they have the resources to do it. So how exactly is BRICS deploying soft power through cultural exchange? Let's break down what's actually happening on the ground. First, there's the education piece. Programs like the Shanghai Summer School BRICS program bring students together from member nations for intensive cultural and academic exchange. These aren't just study abroad programs. They're strategic initiatives to build a generation of leaders who understand each other's cultures, speak each other's languages, and see BRICS cooperation as natural rather than threatening. Then there's the BRICS Phone initiative. And this one's fascinating. BRICS Phone aims to establish BRICS cultural centers within each member country, serving as hubs for language education, cultural exchange, and educational mobility. Think about the implications here. Russian kids learning Mandarin. Brazilian students studying Hindi. South African scholars teaching Portuguese. You're creating linguistic bridges that have never existed before. And here's why that matters. Language is power. For decades, if you wanted to participate in global commerce, science, or diplomacy, you needed to learn English. That gave English-speaking nations an enormous advantage. But what happens when there are multiple linguistic power centers? When knowing Mandarin, Portuguese, or Arabic becomes just as valuable as knowing English, the power balance shifts. But the cultural exchange goes way beyond education. BRICS tourism commanded a collective market of $5.09 trillion in 2024. With tourist flow among BRICS countries soaring to 5 million trips by the end of 2024, quadrupling the figure from just a year earlier. Think about what happens when millions of people are crossing borders within BRICS nations. They're eating each other's food, experiencing each other's festivals, forming personal connections. And when you've walked through the Taj Mahal, danced at Carnival in Rio, explored the Hermitage Museum in St. Petersburg, those places stop being foreign. They become part of your mental map of the world. Now let's talk about one of the most powerful soft power tools in existence: cinema. Hollywood has shaped global culture for over a century. American movies taught the world what success looks like, what romance looks like, what heroes look like. They created a visual vocabulary that became universal. But here's what's happening now. India's film industry produces more movies annually than Hollywood. Bollywood, Tollywood, and other Indian film industries create content for billions of people who do and see themselves reflected in Western media. And it's not just India. China is building a massive film industry, with some of the world's most expensive movies being produced there. Brazil has a thriving cinema culture that's distinctly Latin American. Russia's film industry, while smaller, produces content that resonates throughout Eastern Europe and Central Asia. The BRICS Film Festival has been showcasing movies from member countries, creating platforms where filmmakers can reach audiences beyond their home markets. And here rests the thing about movies. They are incredibly effective soft power tools because people watch them voluntarily. You're not being forced to absorb the culture. You're choosing to engage with it for entertainment. And what you watch shapes how you think. When global audiences watch Indian films, they start to understand Indian values, family structures, social dynamics. When they watch Brazilian films, they see life through a Brazilian lens. This is soft power in action, but it's not all smooth sailing. There are significant challenges. First, unlike the West, which for a long time presented a relatively unified cultural front, BRICS is incredibly diverse. The cultural values of China are very different from those of Brazil. The social norms in Saudi Arabia are a world away from those in South Africa. Finding a common cultural narrative that appeals to everyone within the bloc, let alone to the outside world, is a monumental task. The West exported ideas like individualism and consumerism. What is the unifying idea that BRICS exports? That's still a question mark. Second, there's the issue of freedom of expression. Some BRICS members have state-controlled media and significant restrictions on artistic and creative freedom. This can make it difficult to produce cultural products that feel authentic and resonate globally. Hollywood's power partly came from its ability to critique America itself. Can a state-funded Chinese blockbuster or a Russian historical epic achieve the same level of global appeal if it can't engage in genuine self-reflection or criticism? This is a major hurdle. Finally, trust is a huge factor. Decades of Western soft power have built a level of cultural trust and familiarity that BRICS nations are only beginning to establish. It takes a long time to build that kind of deep-seated cultural influence. You can't just flip a switch. It's a marathon, not a sprint. So where does this leave us? Is the BRICS cultural project destined to fail, or is it the start of a genuine shift in global influence? The truth is, it's not a zero-sum game. The rise of BRICS soft power doesn't necessarily mean the end of Western cultural influence. What it does mean is that the monologue is over. The era of a single dominant cultural narrative is giving way to a global conversation. We're moving towards a world with multiple cultural centers of gravity. A world where you might stream a Brazilian series on a Chinese-owned platform, listen to Indian pop music on your morning commute, and plan your vacation to see ancient ruins in Ethiopia. This makes the world a more complex, more diverse, and frankly, a more interesting place. The real story here is not about one culture replacing another. It's about the end of a monopoly. It's about billions of people getting a chance to tell their own stories in their own voices on their own terms. And whether you see BRICS as a threat or an opportunity, one thing is certain: the world's cultural landscape is being redrawn right before our eyes. And you're now one of the few people who understands how and why it's happening. Now, this is where the BRICS cultural strategy gets really interesting and maybe a little controversial. They're making a play based on what they call traditional values. Picture this. From September 15th to 17th, 2025, Brazil hosted the second BRICS Forum on Traditional Values. The theme? Uniting traditions, strengthening nations. This is a very deliberate move. For decades, Western soft power has championed individualism and liberal social values. BRICS is flipping the script, positioning itself as the defender of family, community, cultural heritage, and respect for elders. Whether you agree with that or not, it's a brilliant strategy. Billions of people across the globe feel that Western cultural influence has weakened their own social fabric. BRICS is basically saying, we get it. We respect your traditions. You don't have to abandon your identity to be part of the modern world. They're focusing on people-to-people connections, cultural exchanges, and joint creative projects. This is soft power aimed squarely at nations that want economic growth without having to become culturally Western. It's an entirely different model for modernity. But let's be real, cultural exchange isn't just about good vibes. It's about money and influence. The BRICS travel and tourism market is already worth over $213 billion, and it's projected to hit $260 billion by 2029. That's not just economic activity. It's monetized cultural influence. Every tourist, whether they're from India visiting China or Brazil visiting Russia, becomes a cultural ambassador. They go home with stories, buy local products, and form new opinions. And tourism is just the beginning. Experts are talking about creating a unified BRICS cultural market. Imagine student and artist exchanges, joint cultural festivals, and literary works translated into multiple languages. Think of Brazilian musicians selling out shows in China, Russian literature becoming popular in India, and South African art being exhibited in São Paulo. This creates a whole new cultural ecosystem that doesn't need a stamp of approval from New York or Paris. When cultural products can reach a global audience without passing through Western gatekeepers, those gatekeepers lose their power. That's the real challenge to Western cultural dominance. Now let's add technology to the mix because this is a game changer. Moscow recently hosted the BRICS Urban Future Forum, where Russia promoted its blueprint for modern cities, emphasizing the importance of digitalization. Technology isn't just a tool anymore. It's a form of cultural expression. The apps you use, the platforms you're on, the algorithms that feed you content, they all reflect a certain set of values. China has already shown this with WeChat and TikTok, which operate very differently from Facebook or Twitter. They reflect a Chinese approach to community and information. As BRICS nations develop their own tech ecosystems, they're building digital spaces that mirror their own values, not Silicon Valley's. When billions of people start using these platforms, it will reshape global digital culture. For countries like Russia and China, technology is a way to push new global norms. This is next-generation soft power. It's not just about influencing what people watch or read. It's about influencing how they communicate and experience the entire digital world. But hold on, let's not get ahead of ourselves. This grand plan for cultural exchange faces some huge challenges that could bring the whole thing down. First, the internal diversity is massive. BRICS isn't like the EU, where countries share a lot of cultural and historical ground. Brazil and Russia have very little in common culturally. India and China have been geopolitical rivals for decades. How do you build a meaningful cultural exchange between countries with such different languages, religions, and histories? What exactly is the shared BRICS culture they're even promoting? If it's just not Western, that's a pretty flimsy foundation. Second, there's the elephant in the room, China's overwhelming dominance. In 2024, China's economy was 5 times larger than India's and completely dwarfed every other BRICS member. When you have that kind of economic imbalance, cultural exchange can easily turn into cultural dominance by the biggest player. Other members are rightly worried about Chinese soft power overshadowing their own identities. Will these BRICS cultural centers just end up promoting Chinese culture? And third, we have to talk about authoritarianism. Several BRICS members have serious issues with freedom of expression and the press. Russia has cracked down on independent media. China heavily censors its cultural industries. Iran has strict religious controls. So when these governments talk about cultural exchange, you have to wonder if they're really talking about exporting their authoritarian models. Is this truly about mutual understanding, or is it about creating an alliance that's more accepting of authoritarian rule? These are the tough questions that will determine the future of BRICS cultural ambitions. So how is the West reacting to the BRICS cultural offensive? Well, it's mostly a mix of dismissal and concern. You'll often hear critics say BRICS lack shared goals, that China's dominance is a problem, or that they haven't achieved anything transformative. But here's what they're missing. The ability to shift narratives and shape expectations is a form of power in itself. The fact that over 30 nations want to join BRICS shows its growing diplomatic appeal. Western analysts seem to be just waiting for BRICS to fail, constantly pointing out internal disagreements, but they're missing the bigger picture. BRICS doesn't need perfect unity to be effective. It just needs to offer a credible alternative to Western-led institutions and cultural norms. And guess what? It's working. Instead of just using economic or military might, BRICS is using legitimacy and representation as tools of influence. It's a classic soft power play to build a multipolar world. The mere existence of BRICS as another cultural pole changes the entire game. Suddenly, countries in Africa, Latin America, and Asia have more choices. They no longer have to align only with Western norms to get access to trade, development, and international respect. And that as a real threat to an order that has been dominated by Western soft power for centuries. So where does this all lead? We are in the early days of a truly multipolar cultural world. For the first time in modern history, non-Western nations have the economic resources, tech platforms, and institutional frameworks to project their own soft power on a global scale. This doesn't mean Western culture is going away. Hollywood isn't vanishing, and English will still be important. But it does mean Western culture will no longer be the default. It will be one option among many. For people in the global south, this can be incredibly liberating. Imagine growing up watching Bollywood instead of Hollywood, or studying in Shanghai instead of Stanford. It means experiencing art that reflects your own reality, instead of being told that Western art is the universal standard. But there are also valid concerns. Will this new soft power promote genuine cultural diversity, or will we just be swapping Western dominance for Chinese dominance? Will it respect the cultural diversity within its own member nations? These questions don't have easy answers yet, because this is all unfolding in real time. What we can say for sure is that the era of uncontested Western soft power is over. The world is just too large, too diverse, and too wealthy for any single cultural model to dominate like American culture did in the 20th century. And BRICS, with all its challenges, is proving that alternative cultural power structures are not just possible, they're already being built. So let's break it down. Soft power isn't about having the biggest army or economy. It's about shaping how people see the world, making your culture and values seem attractive. For decades, the West had a monopoly on this. But BRICS, representing nearly half of humanity, has decided their stories deserve to be told too. And they're building the infrastructure for it: language centers, exchange programs, film industries, and digital platforms. Is it working? Well, they haven't replaced Western soft power, but they have created alternatives. And in a world where choice matters, alternatives are power. The optimistic view is that we're heading toward a richer, more diverse global conversation. A kid in Nigeria can choose between Nollywood, Bollywood, or Hollywood based on what resonates with them. No single culture dominates. The pessimistic view is that we're splitting into competing cultural blocs, with soft power becoming just another arena for great power competition. Instead of one hegemon, we get several regional ones, each demanding cultural loyalty. The realistic view is probably somewhere in the middle. Culture rarely follows neat geopolitical lines. Young people are already mixing and matching influences in ways policymakers can't control. K-pop is huge in Latin America, and Bollywood has massive followings in the Middle East. Cultural exchange is messy, unpredictable, and that's actually a good thing. But what's undeniable is that the cultural map of the world is being redrawn. And BRICS, for all its flaws, is one of the key forces doing it. We are witnessing a historic shift. The 20th century was defined by Western cultural dominance. The 21st will be defined by cultural multipolarity. So what do you think? Is this a positive development that challenges old power structures? Or are we just trading one form of dominance for another? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, because this conversation is just getting started. And if this dive into soft power opened your eyes to how the world is really changing, hit that subscribe button. The most important shifts aren't on battlefields. They're happening in our classrooms, movie theaters, and art galleries. Thanks for watching.